Okay, so before I introduce myself, we're gonna talk now about design in GovStack. So how can GovStack be used to kickstart the design of public services? I have a background in coding, user-centered design, digital government. I started out in a company called FutureGov, which was at the forefront of using technology and service design in local government in the UK. And I spent 7 years in the government digital service in the UK on different platform products like procurement platforms, identity, or standards and assurance. I was on an international team in the UK, so I was so lucky to be able to spend time with people in different digital agencies around the world, and I started to spot, obviously, similarities between a lot of our challenges, and we're all solving them in these different silos. So for the past 2.5 years, I decided to go it on my own, and with the aim of continuing to bring people together and share knowledge between different digital agencies in lots of kind of informal and formal ways, I suppose. But let's talk about design in GovStack. So I co-lead the UX UI working group in GovStack, which is more than 50, maybe we're more than near 100 people in our Slack channel, where we're all from different digital agencies around the world, sharing experiences on patterns for what services look like. And I'm going to use patterns as a way to frame this conversation today. And after the talk, we'll come down to the tables and we can continue the discussion. So yeah, let's recap what GovStack is. Marika already covered quite a lot of this, so I'm just going to point out that GovStack provides specifications for this modular open source building blocks. It doesn't provide necessarily the tech. There's tech examples of implementations, and there's a marketplace. But it's kind of a neutral home for specifications and a place for us to collaborate, which is also why it's a really good space for the design working group. We needed a neutral space where we could all come together. It's not owned necessarily by a specific government or a specific consultancy or something like that. But I'll stand out the way a little bit, but here you can see the concept of a stack, I suppose. There's the kind of the base layers that you need for government. You need to obviously host things somewhere. You have foundational building blocks, and then you have enablers like the marketplace where you can find people who can provide those building blocks. And then there's things like the data exchange layer and things like that, which is a little like Crossroad, I suppose, you might be familiar with. So if I take this out of the stack and I just break out the blocks, it might look something like this. But having building blocks doesn't necessarily equal a good user experience or a good service. So one of the first things we did in our working group, and this is probably going back a couple of years now, is develop a kind of service design good practice guideline for how we deliver work within GovStack, but also how, as a kind of resource to nudge people who are implementing GovStack building blocks to think about user-centered design, think about accessibility and inclusion, providing consistent services across government, and making good technical choices. We also felt that we kind of needed building codes for this modular design, so shared ways of assembling and delivering using these building blocks. So here you can see a user flow. It's the apply for a construction service. You can't see the detail. It's very, it's quite a short-looking service, but I've made the image very small. But as you go through, you can see this is kind of a pattern that could be reused for other application journeys. So it's an apply pattern. But this pattern is made up of sub-patterns. So we've got find, register, give consent, pay, make a payment, notification. These are all what we call patterns. And we spent a lot of time trying to think, is this a sub-pattern? Is this a higher level pattern? In the end, it's all just patterns that can be combined, and I'll show you an example in a minute. But the concept here is to give people a starting point when you're designing, say, an application journey. You're not starting from scratch, and we can already show, okay, here's how all the building blocks are going to connect together. It's a user journey. This bookshelf is not just for show. I actually have a book on it, and it's huge. So I don't know if anyone's seen this book. Do raise your hand if you've seen it before. It's called A Pattern Language, and it's by a group of people, but written by Christopher Alexander back in the 70s. And it's 250 design patterns, or architectural design patterns, and it ranges from the very high level. So if we look here, mosaic of subcultures. How do you design a city that can support a mosaic of subcultures? Then as you walk through the book, you've got kind of middle level patterns. So how do you design a space where people feel comfortable sleeping in public, if that's a need? And then down, like I said, the minutiae, paving with cracks between the stones. So it really gets into the minutiae of a design pattern. And at the end of each pattern, there's this paragraph which just shows how all of the patterns come together to create what you're trying to achieve. So if you're trying to design an adventure playground, you might need to look at sunny place. You might need to look at bike paths and racks and a sitting wall. So all of the numbers there just reference a pattern in this book. So come and have a look at this. I'd love to share that with people. But I think it's worth noting, when I bought this book, I was hoping for loads of architectural diagrams because I thought it would make a lovely coffee table piece. But actually, it is more of a language. It's describing the considerations when you're designing a city or a house or a door frame. It's everything you need to consider. But the book proves that this is not new thinking about design patterns. Even back in 2015, which is a decade ago, the head of design in the UK government wrote a blog post about how we can embrace and use patterns to stop repeating the same things in government. My old company, FutureGov, worked with Essex County Council in the UK and developed a service pattern library. So this is just, they documented 147 steps that happen in different services. So you can browse, apply services. Here are the steps that happen. Very simple. And even now, we're seeing in the private sector in the UK, so BT and EE, which is a big telecommunications company in the UK, is looking at patterns to try and bring consistency to their services. And they really need it, I think. And in the central government, the Ministry of Justice is actively working on how can we quickly document patterns. So what's a standard for documenting a pattern? And they're running a lot of spotting sessions. And we're working with them and TPX, hopefully, to standardize our approach to spotting and defining patterns. You could imagine maybe if we are all following a similar standard, then we can produce some kind of digital public good, some registry that is a tool for everybody, because the reason I came to GovStack to try and push this or explore this opportunity is that it's a neutral space away from a specific owner, something where it could live. Okay, and in the Service Design in Government conference back in 2018 in Glasgow, Kay Dale and Ignacia Orellana ran a workshop, international workshop, to define what is a principle for a service pattern. And I want to focus on number 4, which is create in a collaborative way and provide a common language, which I think really resonates with what we're trying to do at GovStack, and through kind of a working group of people volunteering their time from organizations to feed into these service patterns, or at least the concept. So as you can see, people have been thinking about this for a decade now. So where are the patterns? And I think I've been asking myself that every day. So where are the patterns? How can we actually use this? Because it's a lovely concept, but we need to see it in use. But let's have a little look at I'm jumping ahead, the anatomy of a service pattern. So they're reusable parts of a service that can be pieced together to build an end-user journey. So they act like a template, for example. And I recently saw a demonstration from Italy, the service design team in Italy who are building the IO app. They support digital services for different municipalities around the whole country. So what they're seeing is they're putting the same service online over and over and over. So they've managed to define a set, I think, 80 templates for services that basically follow the same journey. So I'd love to speak to them more and find out what their pattern spotting process is and what we can learn from them. But it is happening. So with how are we thinking about service patterns? Well, at the top level, we have an end-to-end service. For example, apply for a business license, pay for parking fees, or apply for the construction permit, which was our use case. The layer that we're most focused on, though, is the service pattern layer. It's fine, check, ask for information. And each of these patterns are made up of steps. Not necessarily UI, but considerations and things to think about. And the things I put on your table are examples of what a step might look like. So they're quite visual. They look like a UI. They look like a mobile interface, but it's not. Just think about it as a considerations in that journey. So some of them have QR codes. They take you to the first draft proof of concept of the documentation, so if you're implementing it. And then the next layer, it would be great if you look at a step, for example, conversational UI or understanding requirements, and you can see which building blocks or which specifications you might need to reference. So how could you use service patterns right before you even move to the design phase? It might be part of exploring the policy. It's how can we use these tools to create proposals before even procurement and get feedback on them early? I want to show you, I prefer to show work in progress than something super polished. So this is something that we're working on in the working group at the moment, and it's open for feedback. So I'll give a link to our newsletter, and you can jump into this file and add comments. But service catalog, every government is either working or has a service catalog. So we decided to start there. It's the beginning of any journey with government. So in this service catalog, you can see it kind of breaks into two. Our guidance or our documentation is split into two. We've got pattern guidance, and then we've got a kind of appendix of useful templates and things that we've shared with each other. An example here, you can see user flows, but you can also see enablers. So before you implement a service catalog, you might need a service registry. You need to know what services you have in government. So we've provided a list of here's the data that you might want to collect through a survey from all of your staff or from across your organization. So at least you can find out what services you have. And these are all things that people have done. It's not theoretical. Also, you can see here, proposed different taxonomies, because it's something that every team who does this thinks about. Okay, do we need to order it by life events or by service type or by ministry? Or do we need a way to jump between all of them? That's your decision, but there are templates there that might help speed that up. Okay, so service patterns can be a tool for organizations. I already talked about you can use these as part of your creating proposals, getting feedback, or drafting tenders, for example. You can point to examples of what a service might look like. We don't think you would then build and implement it as is. It's just a starting point to get to the research stage really quickly, so you can put it in front of real humans. I recently met with the Japan Digital Service, and we talked about service patterns, among other things, and they had a very inspiring and intentionally designed office, which I thought was very cool. It has this kind of end-to-end wall of library that divides the desk area from the kind of creative space, or where they might run events. So it was full of architectural books, design books, art books, so it kind of made you think a bit more abstractly, which was great. But yeah, I met with Hashi-san here on the right, and he talked me through how they're using service patterns practically in their organization. So they have an assurance process. When a department delivers a service, the central agency assures that service. And as they're doing that, something they're looking out for is patterns. What is being repeated across every service that they're looking for? And they just document that into a kind of knowledge hub. They're using Notion. When they come to design an internal service within the digital agency, they then use that as a reference and they build off that. So they kind of test it themselves. And their ambition is then to apply this to a whole sector of government. So for example, looking at a healthcare system, how can they rapidly improve consistency of the user experience across healthcare as they look to digitize? I'll share it on LinkedIn, but there's a blog post about that, and they're thinking about a system of systems. So they see design patterns as part of that system. And I think it's kind of points to how designers are now thinking a bit more abstractly, less about specifically a user interface and more about the whole system as a whole. I'll quickly show you some examples of how we could practically use patterns. So we're seeing it pop up a lot in design systems. Here's the Gov.uk one, but also Ministry of Justice, the Home Office in the UK. All of the different departments are repeating themselves on service patterns, which is not the point of service patterns. So we're really hoping that maybe through GovStack, it could be a place people can kind of pull their information and their learning. It could be used as a backbone for a service blueprint. So obviously, you might have experience doing as-is journey maps, thinking about 2B journey maps of a service. So imagine you're mapping the as-is service. You can pull out, okay, here are relevant steps that match what happens already. So these cards become useful kind of prompts, I suppose. All very nice, but we want to get people prototyping really easily and quickly, knowing that there's specifications that back up their designs. So here's an example of using Figma as a prototyping tool. So we've pulled those patterns into Figma, and you can really enable someone to create a quick wireframe flow, get feedback from their team or from suppliers, and then test it with users easily by turning it into a mid-fidelity prototype. So as you see, each of these patterns has a low fidelity and a mid fidelity. And using something like Figma means you can quickly link them up, press play, and put that in front of somebody. It looks like a real thing. So here you can see just flipping it into higher fidelity, and then you can jump in and change the content. And this is being used right now for the second time with the Women in GovTech Challenge. There's 100 incredible women in part of this challenge. And yeah, we've been actively using this as one of the tools to help with prototyping services quickly. Okay, I have a video, but it's very quick, so I'm going to give a little intro to it, so in case I can't keep up. So I'm just going to show you an example of our sandbox environment, and that just shows walking through a service. What does that look like, and which building blocks are being activated? Okay, so if you go to govstack.global, you can get to this page, and up in our offerings, you can jump down to the GovTest. And here you can go to the use case simulation. So this is a kind of an example of a service in the center, and then on the right, it's showing which building blocks are being accessed throughout. Don't worry too much about what this service is. It's unconditional social cash transfer program. But as you click these little prompts, you can find out what's happening in that service. Now you can see it's accessing identity, information mediator, which is like the crossroad layer. So now we're looking from a user's perspective, a citizen's perspective. We're checking our eligibility, it's pulling information from our register, and we can access things from the payment building block as well. I think I'm actually running ahead. There we go. If we want to change our bank information, it's accessing that building block. The workflow building block is what works out where to send people throughout a user journey. But everybody's talking about AI. What does service design mean in this kind of, in a future AI-enabled ecosystem of building blocks? So we have the infrastructure that underpins government services. We have the building blocks. What does service design mean? Is there any point looking at service patterns? Can ChatGPT already create a set of useful service patterns? Maybe. So I've been thinking about this, but this is less me talking to you, more prompting the question. So after this talk, I'd love to speak to people about what they're learning, where I can read more, what we can share in the open. So at the first level of getting a bit smarter, Obviously, we can use patterns as a service design tool. Perhaps it's something that can feed into low-code platforms. I've seen there's suppliers here like Liquio who build these kinds of low-code platforms. I was involved in this student challenge recently through Open Group, and there were 11 student teams working on different briefs. One of the briefs was GovBuild. What would a GovBuilder look like with the technology that's emerging right now? So their challenge was to look at stacks like India Stack or GovStack, look at patterns as well, and start to think about how does innovative technology help us build services more easily. So this doesn't look too fancy, but at the moment, I've typed into this tool, apply for a juggling license. I want to start licensing juggling in my country because it's very dangerous. So it proposes a set of data requirements you might gather. Interesting. So applicant name, okay. What type of items do you juggle? Do you have insurance? Where are you going to juggle those items? Are you going to juggle books? So I think this is interesting. It's kind of defining requirements. And what you can also see is it's got a tab for pages and components. So it can look at the patterns, look at this potential pattern registry or library and say, okay, here are some existing patterns you might use. So you can very quickly get to a prototype or a live service perhaps. And you could imagine this being a drafting tool. I think the way design is changing is we're still going to be thinking about service design. I've talked a lot about UI, and I think different suppliers are probably going to be providing these tools. So I think as designers, we're probably going to start thinking, taking a more kind of API-led approach. Let me go back a bit. So we won't necessarily know how citizens are going to be interacting with our government services. They might be going through a voice assistant, they might be going through a third-party app not provided by the government, or they could go through the government website. But let's imagine we're in a near future where maybe the website isn't the main way people interact with government. So what are we actually thinking here? Perhaps service patterns play a part in this kind of registry concept, which the workflow can call from and decide how to serve that service to a citizen. Like I said, service patterns, they might just be considerations, steps or rules for delivering a service. People need to know what documents they require ahead of time. They need to know where to get those documents or things like that. So those are the rules that any interface will need to know. But let's bring it back to the slide at the start. So I showed you this slide, and I think there's a lot of talk about can we build an AI chatbot instead of a service portal. I think from talking to people in the working group, it's a bit of a jump if you don't have the basic infrastructure in place. So we're not going to replace, I think, websites tomorrow. I think you still need to have registries, standards, and I'm hoping, or we're exploring the idea of service patterns as kind of critical enabler to that ecosystem. So if you want to work with us or talk to us more about service patterns, I've set up a little group called the Service Pattern Unit. So it's me, Betty Mwema from Kenya, but she's working in the UK government now, and Stefan Draskic from Slovenia, who's now in Berlin. So there's three of us kind of having lots of interviews with people and publishing that in regular blogs at the moment. And like I said, we're working in the open, so if any of this is interesting to you, you want to keep the discussion going, you can join the working group. We're very open. We have a Slack channel. We have a mailing list where we talk about what we've learned and what we're working on, and we invite people to come to workshops and things like that, or you can get in touch with me directly. This QR code, which is kind of in shadow, takes you to the page to join the working group if that's interesting to you. Cool, and actually, I should probably mention what I've put on the table. I've just put examples of materials that we used in a workshop recently where we were designing an end-to-end service and getting feedback on, okay, what does the guidance, how useful is the guidance that we've created? So what you'll see if you follow those QR codes takes you to our kind of proof of concept. So I really need to get down and get the iteration 2 published onto the GovStack documentation. But now I'll pass, actually I think we might have a minute or so for any quick questions, but we're going to have more space at the end for a discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurence. As Laurence said, we might have a very brief opportunity to ask questions at the moment, while we have a more longer slot at the end of the workshop for deeper insights. But the question, are there any volunteers from the audience? Obviously not. Oh, yes, Andres, of course. Mike is on your way.
Thanks. Can you also use the... sorry.
It works.
So first, thanks for the very informative insight to your working group. But my question is actually around the service portfolio. So to what extent do you think those principles can be also applied to service portfolio? I mean, instead of focusing on a single service, but to rather focus on the portfolio of services.
I was talking to a designer working in the Scottish government, and they're looking at, okay, so we know there's different patterns, apply, for example. Can we put buckets of services together and build them once? And I think maybe this touches on it, maybe not, but they've been looking at building a set of services that apply for, that they just have to do small tweaks. So that's where they're looking at creating patterns to apply it to try and digitize as many services as possible in the Scottish government. But I don't know if when you're talking about portfolio, you're thinking more about the building blocks of government, like payment or...
I'm actually thinking more about getting rid of the services at all.
Yeah. We were having a good chat yesterday. I should have mentioned it in this talk, actually. But when we're talking about standards, so say we looked at that prototype for a service builder that the students built, they worked on that in 6 weeks, which is incredible. And yeah, I'll post a link to their project. What were we saying? Yeah, yesterday we were saying, so we can rapidly digitize services now. We can put paper forms online. But that's not really what service design is about. It's about questioning, should that form exist? And it's like questioning the questions that you're asking. So are they necessary? So if we're automating putting government services online through AI tools, you raised a great question yesterday, so I just want to highlight that. But should our tools question the need for each service as well? So can they apply the service standard to their implementation process, and then highlight where you might not align to the service standard? That might be interesting, because I know, for example, people in some governments are looking at, can they put 20,000 PDF forms online? Because there's never going to be money to do a proper design process on each of those forms and make them into services. So can they combine the AI with the service builder that they have to quickly get those online? But that's a great idea. We should talk more about that, yeah, publicly. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Laurence.